student went to bed in her room, but just minutes later, a fire broke out. When firefighters rushed in, something fell off right away. Police got involved, and detectives started piecing together a series of unsettling clues and testimonies. What they uncovered was a dark, tangled truth, one that would leave everyone shaken. Andrea Del Vesco was born on June 29, 1994, in Chicago, Illinois. She had an older brother, a younger sister, and parents she was incredibly close to. Andrea also came from a well-off family. Her dad ran an investment firm. After her little sister was born, the family moved to Austin, Texas, where Andrea enrolled in a prestigious Christian school. She stood out fast. She played on the field hockey and lacrosse teams and racked up a bunch of awards, especially for studying languages like Spanish and Latin. When she graduated, Andrea applied to several top colleges. In the end, she chose UCLA, planning to earn degrees in psychology and Spanish. She loved the language and seriously thought about moving to a Spanish-speaking country one day. Her parents had hoped she'd pick a university in Chicago because her older brother was studying there and could keep an eye on her. But they ultimately supported her choice, and she headed to California. In her first week on campus, she joined a sorority and quickly made friends. Andrea moved into the dorms with them and spent the next few years working hard toward her degrees. She also picked up part-time jobs whenever she could. Even though her family could provide everything she needed, she wanted to pull her own weight. In 2015, when Andrea was 21, she entered her senior year. At UCLA, sorority and fraternity members in their final years could rent small apartment-style complexes just off campus. It was considered a big deal, both prestigious and a chance to finally live a bit more independently outside the dorms. Andrea and her sorority friends jumped at the opportunity and rented a place just a short walk from the university. Around that same time, Andrea adopted a little chihuahua from a shelter, and soon after, she began volunteering there on a regular basis. September was an especially important month for her sorority. It was recruitment season when they welcomed new freshmen into the house, so Andrea and her friends were busy preparing for it. On the night of September 20th, they spent hours working together, setting up displays, painting posters, making decorations, and getting everything ready for the big event. As the night wore on, the girls started heading to their rooms one by one. Andrea stayed up with a friend in the living room, chatting until 3:30 in the morning. Eventually, she dozed off on the couch, but a little while later she woke up and went to her bedroom. A few hours later, Andrea's roommate, who lived upstairs, was suddenly woken by the sound of a woman screaming and a dog barking. The noise seemed to be coming from downstairs, so she tried calling her, but Andrea didn't pick up. Concerned, she decided to call the police, and officers arrived within minutes. By the time they entered the building, everything had gone quiet. They walked through the place but didn't find any signs of a break-in or anything unusual. Most of the other girls were still asleep, so the officers chose not to disturb them. Thinking it might have just been a nightmare or maybe nothing serious at all, they left. But only minutes later, Andrea's roommate heard a loud crash from below. She rushed out onto her balcony, and that's when she saw smoke pouring from Andrea's room, followed by flames spreading fast. To her shock, she also saw a man wrapped in a blanket running out of Andrea's room. At that moment, the fire alarms went off and the students started evacuating. Some of Andrea's friends tried to get into her room, but the door was locked. A strange detail, since the girls never locked their doors. Using a spare key, they finally got it open. Inside, Andrea's room was filled with smoke and flames. Through the haze, they could barely make out the outline of a person lying motionless on the bed. They shouted Andrea's name, but there was no answer. The fire spread too quickly, and they had no choice but to get out. By the time firefighters arrived, the building was in chaos. The students huddled outside, and it didn't take long for everyone to realize Andrea was missing. The fire spread quickly through the building, and it took 32 firefighters more than 15 minutes to finally put it out. When they were able to enter Andrea's room, they found a body lying on the bed, and that's when the police immediately got involved. The fire had done so much damage that the body couldn't be identified by sight. It was handed over to the medical examiner, but detectives quickly realized who it had to be. Other students told them that the room was Andrea's, and she was the only one who hadn't made it out that night. Firefighters also found Andrea's Chihuahua live in the room, and the dog was quickly taken to a vet clinic for treatment. Even though medical confirmation would take time, word of the tragedy spread across campus almost instantly. Within hours, thousands of students at UCLA had heard about it, and most assumed Andre had died in some kind of accident, maybe an electrical short or something like a candle left burning. But firefighters had their doubts right away. All the outlets were intact, and there was no sign of any accidental source of fire in the room. What they did notice was strange. Sitting on the bed right next to the body was a trash can. That in itself seemed suspicious. After looking more closely, they concluded that the fire had started there, which meant someone had put the trash can on the bed and deliberately set it on fire. It was nearly impossible to believe Andrea could have done that to herself. Firefighters shared their findings with the police, and soon, forensic investigators were going through the room in detail. What they discovered made the case even darker. There were large bloodstains spread across the bed and on the floor. That detail alone shattered the theory of a tragic accident, because in a real accidental fire, there would have been no reason for blood to be there at all. Meanwhile, the medical examiners worked to confirm the victim's identity, but the fire had been so intense that even her fingerprints were gone. In the end, they were able to confirm it was Andrea by using dental records. What they found next was shocking. Her body showed 19 stab wounds, which completely ruled out any possibility of an accident. There was another crucial detail. The examiners discovered no smoke in her lungs. That meant Andrea was already dead before the fire even started. As for sexual assault, there were no clear signs. But because the body was so badly damaged by the flames, they couldn't say for certain. What they could confirm was that there was no trace of the attacker's DNA left behind. The case was now officially a homicide investigation. ABD detectives began questioning all of the sorority members who lived in the complex. They learned Andrea didn't have a boyfriend at the time, and she didn't seem to have conflicts with anyone. One of the students, the same one who had called the police before the fire, shared an unsettling detail. That night, she had driven her boyfriend to the airport and got back home around 5:30 in the morning. She entered the courtyard of the sorority house, where the stairs led up to her room. As she walked up and started unlocking her door, she suddenly heard a noise behind her. When she turned around, she saw a man standing at the bottom of the stairs, and the moment he noticed her, he bolted. Frightened, she quickly went inside her room. She thought about calling the police, but convinced herself not to. Maybe he was just someone visiting one of the other girls, or maybe another student passing through. She hadn't seen his face clearly, but she remembered what he was wearing. A black baseball cap, a dark t-shirt, and jeans. Still unsettled, she phoned her boyfriend and told him what happened. He reassured her, and eventually she went to sleep. But just 45 minutes later, she woke to the sound of commotion downstairs. The same noise that made her call the police. After the officers left, she once again heard noises. Stepping out onto her balcony, she caught sight of a man climbing out of Andrea's window, wrapped in a red blanket, and she instantly knew it was the same guy she'd seen near the staircase less than an hour earlier. She shouted after him, but he ran off. She rushed outside, hoping to see where he went, but by then he was gone. What she did notice, though, was a red Nissan driving away from the area. She couldn't make out the license plate, but there was something else on the rear windshield. 3 big letters. She recognized them right away. It was the abbreviation of a fraternity called Lambda Chi Alpha. Detectives were intrigued by this lead, but they also knew it might not mean anything. That neighborhood was packed with students and notorious for big parties, so the red Nissan could have just belonged to some random college kid heading home from one of them. Still, investigators followed up. They questioned every member of Lambda Chi Alpha, the fraternity whose letters were spotted on the car, but none of them admitted to owning a red Nissan, nor did they know who it belonged to. Detectives then spoke with students who lived in the complex across the street from Andreas, and that's when they learned about another crime that same night. The students said their place had been burglarized. Someone had stolen a laptop, a Bluetooth speaker, and a few other items. This detail caught investigators' attention. They soon learned that in order to use that stolen Bluetooth speaker, the new owner would first have to register it online through the manufacturer's website. Detectives wasted no time. They reached out to the company, handed over the serial number, and asked to be alerted the moment someone tried to activate it. While detectives waited for a call, news of Andrea's death spread far beyond the UCLA campus. At first, investigators didn't reveal that they were dealing with the homicide. Most people, including Andrea's own family, believed she had died in some kind of tragic accident. Her parents only learned the awful truth later from Andrea's sorority sisters. By then, her family had already flown to Los Angeles. Her mother demanded to see the body herself because she couldn't bring herself to believe Andrea was really gone. As for Andrea's dog, vets tried desperately to save the little chihuahua, but it didn't make it. Heartbroken, her parents went to the clinic to say goodbye, and later said that at least the dog would now be with Andrea in heaven. Meanwhile, detectives were still chasing the lead on the red Nissan, but came up empty-handed. Days passed with no progress until the call finally came in. The stolen Bluetooth speaker had just been activated, and the detectives now had an IP address. Traced back to a man named Joseph, living in Fresno, about 3 hours away from UCLA. Police headed straight to his home, and Joseph admitted he had registered the speaker online, but insisted it wasn't his. He said it belonged to his roommate, a man named Alberto. According to Joseph, Alberto had left for Los Angeles a few days earlier to attend a concert and came back on September 22nd, just one day after Andrea's murder. When he returned, he wasn't empty-handed. He brought back the stolen Bluetooth speaker, along with other random items like dishes, towels, and bottles of alcohol. When asked where it all came from, Alberto told him a friend in Los Angeles had just moved and gave him the things he didn't want to take along. Detectives dug deeper and found out Alberto was a 22-year-old student at Fresno State University who had no criminal record. Still, his whereabouts were unclear, and it took investigators several days to track down the house he was staying in. On September 26th, officers surrounded the home and arrested Alberto. At the station, he claimed he had gone to Los Angeles to visit a friend who lived near UCLA. Together, they went to a concert, then spent the next few days hopping from party to party before he headed back home. When a detective asked him about the Bluetooth speaker, Alberto pretended not to know what they were talking about. But once they confronted him with proof that the stolen speaker had been found in his roommate's home, his story changed. Now, he said the speaker had actually been brought by his friend from Los Angeles, who supposedly gave him a ride back to Fresno. But detectives quickly uncovered another inconsistency. Alberto's own roommate told them he saw Alberto return home alone, carrying the speaker and the rest of the stolen items into the garage. Caught in the lie, Alberto switched his story again. This time, he admitted he had stolen them himself. He explained that he and his friend had gone to a student party that night where some of the people were acting rude. Drunk and annoyed, he decided to teach them a lesson by stealing their things, laptop, the speaker, and whatever else he could grab. He insisted he was so intoxicated that he barely knew what he was doing. Alberto added one more detail. He claimed that around 5:30 a.m. after leaving that party, he and his friend were confronted by a man hiding behind a dumpster. The man pulled out a gun and demanded their stuff. Instead of handing it over, they ran, and the stranger fired a shot in their direction. When detectives asked for a description of this gunman, Alberto gave one, and it matched perfectly with what Andrea's neighbor had seen that same night. Detectives, of course, weren't quick to buy Alberto's story, especially since no neighbors had reported hearing gunshots that morning. Still, they pressed him further, asking if he had gone into any women's dorms while he was in Los Angeles. Alberto said he had met 2 students through a mutual friend, but insisted that was the extent of it. Detectives pushed harder, telling him they didn't believe a word he was saying. Under pressure, Alberto changed his story yet again. This time, he claimed that during the same party where he'd stolen the speaker, his friend Eric had met a girl who lived just across the street and decided to go with her. Alberto said he didn't know her name, but when he gave a description, it matched Andrea. Then he went further. He described what she was wearing that night, even down to her underwear, and eventually slipped up and said her name. Detectives realized he was likely lying, spinning stories as he went along, but they also knew they had to squeeze out as many details as possible. When they pushed him to recall more, Alberto put his head in his hands, went silent for a few seconds, then finally muttered, "All right." It was Eric. According to Alberto, just minutes after Eric went off with the girl, he came running back, clearly shaken. He told Alberto they needed to get out of there immediately because he had done something serious. Eric admitted he had attacked the girl, and together they left the party. According to Alberto, Eric threw away a pair of rubber gloves as they left, gloves he'd been wearing when he came out of the student's house. Finally, Alberto claimed that sometime later, after the party, he saw news of Andrea's murder and realized what his friend had done. He messaged Eric, demanding the truth, and Eric confessed to killing her. Detectives still weren't convinced by Alberto's shifting story, but they had no choice but to check it out. They asked where Eric lived, and Alberto pointed them to an apartment complex just 5 minutes from Andrea's place. Police knocked on Eric's door and started asking questions about that night. Eric admitted that he and Alberto had been at the party, but claimed nothing unusual happened. According to him, they got back to his apartment around 3 a.m., and he didn't wake up until closer to 8. He also said he had been very drunk, so his memory of the night was fuzzy. Detectives kept pressing, but Eric stuck to his version. That's when police noticed something important. Eric's apartment complex had surveillance cameras everywhere, so they immediately pulled the footage from the night of Andrea's murder. What they saw blew holes in both men's stories. The footage showed Alberto and Eric walking back into the building at 2:40 a.m., and right away, detectives spotted something striking. One of them was wearing a black baseball cap, a dark t-shirt, and jeans, the exact outfit Andrea's neighbor had described. And it wasn't Eric. It was Alberto. Later footage showed both men leaving the apartment again around 4:30 a.m. They went downstairs, hung around drinking for a while, and then disappeared off camera. The next time they were seen was at 7:11 that morning, returning home. And there was no mistaking it. Alberta was wrapped in the very same red blanket Andrea's sorority sister had seen on the man fleeing her balcony. By this point, detectives had little doubt about Alberto's involvement, but they were still trying to figure out what role, if any, Eric had played. They brought him back in for questioning and showed him the surveillance footage, demanding he come clean. But Eric stuck to his story. He claimed he was so drunk, he barely remembered anything at all, not even leaving the apartment or where they had gone. Even so, investigators now had enough evidence to arrest both men and secure search warrants for their homes. Once they were booked into jail, officers noticed something troubling. Alberto's hands were covered in scratches. They looked exactly like defensive wounds, marked someone might leave behind while fighting him off. When asked about it, Alberto shrugged it off, saying he got into a fight at a party, but couldn't remember with whom. Soon after, forensic teams combed through Eric's apartment. They spotted stains that looked like someone had tried to wash away blood and quickly sent the samples to the lab for testing. Next, detectives tracked down Alberto's car, the red Nissan with the fraternity letters on the back window. It turned out Alberto had once been a member of Lambda Chi Alpha, but not at UCLA. He'd been a part of a chapter in Fresno before being kicked out for bad behavior. Finally, police searched Alberto's home. What they found left no room for doubt. A trash bag containing the same red blanket seen by Andrea's neighbor, a bloody knife, and Alberto's clothing, including his underwear. Even more disturbing, the bag also contained a pair of women's underwear. All of the evidence was sent to the lab for testing. In the meantime, one of Alberto's neighbors came forward with something that immediately caught detectives' attention. He said that when Alberto came back from Los Angeles, he told them that a student had been murdered right across the street from where he'd been at a party. What stood out wasn't just that Alberto knew about the killing, it was the level of detail. According to the neighbor, Alberto described the crime scene in graphic precision, that the victim had been assaulted, stabbed, and then the house was set on fire to cover it up. None of those details had ever been released publicly. Alberto even boasted that the police would never catch the person who did it, because the crime had been done too cleanly. Detectives strongly disagreed, though. They kept digging into the mountain of evidence piling up against him. When forensics finished processing Alberto's car, too was covered in blood. Samples from the vehicle, the knife, and Alberto's clothing all came back with the same result. The blood belonged to Andrea. With that confirmation, prosecutors moved forward. Both Alberto and Eric were formally charged with murder. But detectives still weren't convinced Eric had played an active role. He might not have even known what his friend had done. But with the evidence tying both men to the scene, they had little choice but to charge him alongside Alberto. After they were locked up and this information hit the news, a new witness came forward. He told police that around 5:30 that morning, he had been outside near Andrea's house collecting plastic bottles. While he was there, a man walked up to him and asked if he knew how to fight. The witness said no, and the man headed straight toward Andrea's building. The witness also noticed a red Nissan parked nearby, with another person sitting inside. When detectives brought him to the station, he immediately identified the man who had approached him. It was Alberto. This testimony became an important piece of the puzzle. It showed that Alberto had been the one who approached Andrea's home, while Eric had been sitting in the car. That made Eric's direct involvement in the murder seem even less likely, so investigators now leant toward the idea that Eric truly might not have known what his friend was about to do. Eventually, prosecutors changed Eric's charges. Instead of murder, he now faced counts of aiding and abetting, along with burglary from the other house that night. In 2017, Eric's lawyer negotiated a deal. The prosecution agreed to try him separately from Alberto. Eric pled guilty to the reduced charges and was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison. Alberto's trial began in 2018, and by then, prosecutors had added another charge, animal cruelty, because of the death of Andrea's dog. The prosecution laid out an overwhelming case against him. They argued that Alberto had climbed into Andrea's home through the balcony. Maybe at first he didn't plan to kill her. Maybe he just wanted to steal something valuable. But when Andrea woke up and saw him, she screamed. That's when, according to prosecutors, he pulled a knife, sexually assaulted her, and stabbed her repeatedly. Afterward, he set a trash can on fire to destroy evidence, grabbed a blanket, and fled the scene. The defense, on the other hand, had nothing substantial to counter the evidence. They couldn't present a single strong argument for his innocence. So it didn't take long for the jury to reach their decision. Alberto was guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for September 21st, exactly 3 years to the day after Andrea's murder. On that date, the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He emphasized one thing in particular. Throughout the entire trial, Alberto had never shown an ounce of remorse and never admitted to what he had done. In the end, Alberto was sent away to serve his life sentence. But even after the trial was over, one detail continued to haunt Andrea's parents. As we know, Andrea's roommate had already called the police before the fire even started, and based on the timeline, Alberto was likely still inside her room when the officers arrived. He probably stayed hidden, waiting for them to leave, or maybe even threatened her with a knife to keep her silent. That left a painful question Andrea's parents could never escape. Was Andrea already dead at that point, or was she alive, silenced by Alberto at knife point, too terrified to make a sound? They'll never know for sure, but in their eyes, one thing was clear. If police had checked Andrea's room that night, their daughter might have had a chance to survive. Her parents repeatedly criticized the police department for failing to conduct a more thorough search, but no action was ever taken against the officers. Their explanation was that when they walked through the house, they saw nothing to suggest danger. No signs of forced entry, no sounds of a struggle, only silence. And without stronger evidence, they said, they didn't have enough cause to take further steps. Share your thoughts in the comment section and don't forget to press the like button if you appreciate my video. A mother of 2 vanished under strange circumstances, leaving behind a string of unsettling messages to her family. Police jumped on the case right away, trying to make sense of a web of contradictions. But not even the most seasoned detectives could have imagined where this investigation would lead. What began as a missing persons case soon spiraled into a story that would shock the entire country. Katie Kenyon was born in 1983 in the small British town of Burnley. She had two sisters, older and younger, and the three of them were incredibly close. Even as a kid, Katie stood out for her kindness and generosity. She was the type of person who would drop everything to help someone in need. Later in life, she got married and had two kids, a son and a daughter. But eventually, her husband left the family. He still saw the kids from time to time, but from that point on, Katie was raising them on her own, which wasn't easy. She worked as a social care worker, and her paycheck barely covered the basics. But no matter how hard things got, Katie did everything she could to make sure her children had what they needed. On the morning of April 2nd, 2022, 33-year-old Katie went about her usual routine, got her kids ready, and sent them off to school. But just a few hours later, around noon, her mom got a text from her that felt totally off. Katie said she needed some time away to clear her head and would be gone for a while. Her mom tried calling right away, but the call went straight to voicemail. And that's when the panic really started to set in. She knew Katie had been struggling with anxiety for years, mostly from all the stress in her life. But the idea that she'd just walk away from everything, especially her kids, that just didn't add up. Her mom got in touch with Katie's sisters, and none of them believed the message either. They rushed over to her house and noticed that her car was gone. Using a spare key, they let themselves inside and found all of Katie's belongings right where she'd left them, except for her phone and handbag. It just didn't add up. The idea that Katie had taken off somewhere, leaving behind almost everything she owned, felt completely wrong. Something was off. A little while later, Katie's kids came home from school, and they had something to say too. They'd both received strange messages from their mom. In the text, she said she needed to get help so she could be a better mother and asked them to contact their dad so he could look after them while she was away. As soon as they read the messages, Katie's mom and sisters started seriously doubting that she'd written them. First of all, the tone didn't sound like her at all. But more importantly, there was something else that really stood out. In both messages, the word "while" was misspelled, and that just didn't make sense because Katie never made mistakes like that. Then her son mentioned something else. He said a man named Andrew had messaged him on social media. Andrew was Katie's ex, someone she dated for several years. In the message, he said Katie had checked herself into a clinic and asked him to take care of her dog until she got back. Katie's mom and sisters thought the whole thing was pretty strange. Sure, they'd known she'd dated Andy for a long time, but it had never been a smooth relationship. The two of them were on and off constantly. As far as her family knew, they weren't even together anymore. So it didn't make much sense that Katie would fill him in on her plans, but not say a word to her own mother or kids. In the messages she'd sent her son and daughter, Katie had also mentioned Andy. She said that if their dad couldn't look after them, Andy would step in. One of Katie's sisters eventually got a hold of his number and gave him a call. Andy told her he hadn't seen Katie since the day before, since he'd been at work all morning. He said that around 2 p.m., she texted him saying she was going to drop her car off at his place and that she was leaving the keys and her bank card in his mailbox. Katie had owed Andy a large sum of money, about £6,000, for anxiety treatment he'd helped her pay for in the past. So, according to him, this was her way of paying him back. In her next message, Katie said she was heading back to a clinic because she just couldn't handle the anxiety anymore. Andy said nothing about it struck him as odd, so he didn't think much of it. Still, Katie's sister wasn't buying Andy's story. Not one bit. So, she and her boyfriend decided to drive over to his place and see for themselves. The moment they pulled up, she spotted Katie's car parked outside. Inside, she could see Katie's purse and other personal belongings, which only made her more suspicious. She knocked on Andy's door, hoping to talk to him face to face, but he refused to open it and told them to leave. The whole thing felt incredibly off. Katie's sister couldn't wrap her head around why Andy didn't seem the slightest bit worried or why he was being so uncooperative. Her boyfriend ended up threatening to kick the door down if he didn't let them in, but Andy just called the police instead. A few minutes later, officers arrived and spoke with Katie's sister first. She laid everything out, how the family was worried sick, how they didn't believe for a second that Katie would just vanish without saying a word to anyone. She also pointed out her sister's car still parked there with her stuff inside. After that, the police knocked on Andy's door. He gave them the same story he told over the phone, that he'd been at work when Katie texted him about leaving her car, keys, and bank card, and said she was going to check herself into a clinic. He even let them search his house and his van, and they didn't find anything suspicious. So, the police left, but they did open a missing persons case. Just to cover all bases, they called around to a bunch of clinics, hoping maybe Katie really had checked herself in somewhere, but not a single one had seen her. The next morning, police began piecing together a timeline of Katie's disappearance. And naturally, all eyes were on Andy's house, since that's where her car had been found. Detectives learned there was a surveillance camera nearby, so they pulled the footage from the previous couple of days. On April 21st, the day before Katie went missing, she was seen pulling up to Andy's house. The footage showed her getting into his van, kissing him and smiling. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But the next morning, at 9:20 a.m., things took a very different turn. That was the day Andy told police he'd been at work when Katie supposedly dropped off her car. But the footage said otherwise. It clearly showed Katie arriving at his house, getting out of her car, and climbing into the passenger seat of Andy's van. And right there behind the wheel was Andy himself. Police immediately checked traffic cameras along the direction the van had gone and eventually spotted it again. This time, the van stopped at a McDonald's, then headed out toward the highway. The final footage showed Andy turning onto a rural back road, leading into a wooded area. After that, the van disappeared from view for nearly an hour. But then it popped up again, heading back the way it came. This time, though, there was only one person in the vehicle. So now, a much darker picture was starting to form. Based on the footage, it looked like Andy had driven Katie out to a wooded area and then left without her. After reviewing the surveillance videos, police pulled location data from Katie's phone on the day she went missing. The records showed that her phone disconnected from the tower near her house early that morning, then reconnected near Andy's home. From there, the phone's path followed the exact route the van had taken. But soon enough, things stopped lining up. According to the location data, Katie's phone was still in the van as it headed back towards Andy's place. The problem was, Katie was no longer in the van. And then came the final piece. Investigators checked the time those strange messages were sent to Katie's mom and kids. And by that point, Andy had already returned home alone. But location data clearly showed that those texts were sent from his house. Given that all the evidence directly contradicted Andy's version of events, police decided to head back to his house. And the moment they stepped inside, something fell off. The place was boiling hot. Turns out, Andy had fired up the wood-burning stove, despite the weather being pretty mild outside. Right away, detectives suspected he might have been trying to destroy some evidence. But by the time they got there, all that was left in the stove was ash. Even so, they arrested Andy and brought him in for questioning. Surprisingly, he didn't seem nervous at all. In fact, he looked completely relaxed and stuck to his original story, claiming Katie had probably checked herself into a clinic to deal with her anxiety. When detectives started pressing for more answers, he shut down completely and said he wouldn't talk without a lawyer. So once again, they were left with nothing. After the interrogation, police decided to launch a large-scale search operation in the forest where Katie's phone had last pinged, right before Andy was seen driving back alone. But covering that area wasn't an easy task. They were looking at roughly 25 miles of rugged terrain. Still, they pulled in dozens of officers, requested backup from other agencies, and headed out into the woods. Soon, they had helicopters with thermal imaging, drones, specialized equipment, and even a team of divers. Volunteers joined in too, and the search quickly became one of the biggest operations their town had ever seen. But even with all that manpower, it still wasn't enough to cover such a huge area. Then, out of nowhere, police got a tip. Someone had seen Andy's van parked in a specific part of the forest. That changed everything. Now that they had a likely spot, they were able to narrow the search down to a 5-mile radius. As the search teams combed through the forest, detectives brought Andy in for another round of questioning. This time, they laid out the surveillance footage and other evidence they'd gathered. And now, faced with the facts, Andy changed his story. He admitted that he and Katie had driven out to the woods, but what he said next left investigators baffled. According to Andy, the two of them went there to have a picnic. He claimed Katie had a habit of writing down her thoughts in a journal and then burning the pages as a way to let go of things that were bothering her. He insisted that morning had been no different. They had a picnic, lit a small fire, she burned a few pages, and then, according to him, he drove home. As for what happened to Katie after that, he said he had no idea. Of course, detectives didn't buy Andy's story. But the problem was, they still didn't have any solid leads. The search teams had come up empty, and with no trace of Katie in the woods, investigators shifted their focus to her relationship with Andy. According to her family, Katie had met him 3 years earlier. He had 2 kids from a previous marriage, worked in construction, and at first he seemed like a reliable, stable guy. But it didn't take long for her loved ones to notice cracks in the relationship, and he had a habit of trying to control Katie, telling her how to act, how to talk, even how to think. He also constantly brought up her anxiety, using it as a way to dismiss anything she said or did that he didn't like. And over time, that pressure only made her anxiety worse. Eventually, Andy offered to pay for her treatment, and Katie agreed. But as time went on, things just kept getting worse. The fights became more frequent, more intense, and eventually the relationship fell apart. For Katie, breaking up felt like a weight off her shoulders. But for Andy, it was something he just couldn't accept. Not long after they split, Katie discovered someone had slashed the tires on her car. She was certain it was Andy, but she never reported it to the police. A few months before Katie went missing, she got a letter from the court saying she owed Andy £4,000, the amount he'd spent on her treatment. Katie was already struggling to cover basic expenses for her and her kids, and she had no idea how she'd come up with that kind of money. Over time, late fees piled on, and the debt grew to £6,000. The whole situation sent her anxiety through the roof. She was terrified she'd lose her home, and with it, the only stable place her kids had. But more than anything, she was afraid of Andy. In one message to her mom, Katie said she was scared of him and genuinely believed he might hurt her. She even told her sister, "If anything ever happens to me, look at Andy first." Still, just a month before she disappeared, Andy reached out to her. He told her he regretted ever taking her to court. He promised to drop the case and even said he'd pay all the extra fees that had built up since the ruling. Andy apologized for his anger, told her he wanted to change, and eventually, Katie forgave him. Despite everything, they got back together. Still, detectives found something even more disturbing. Just one day after Andy promised to fix everything with the court, he actually called the debt collectors and told them to go harder on Katie. He wanted them to push her even more. Investigators believe this was all part of his plan to increase the pressure on her, making her even more dependent on him. Katie, of course, had no idea this was happening because Andy kept telling her he was working on canceling the whole thing. A few weeks later, he called the debt collectors again, this time claiming that Katie had shown up at his house and attacked him. Once again, he pushed them to go after her for the money as quickly as possible. When they got in touch with Katie, she freaked out, but Andy brushed it off, telling her she was just being dramatic and there was no reason to panic. He said he was still working on getting the court ruling overturned, but that it was complicated and would take time. And then, just like before, he went right back to telling her she needed help, that something was wrong with her. This gave detectives an even darker picture of what they were dealing with. All the evidence pointed to one thing. Andy was a skilled manipulator and a compulsive liar who would do anything to get what he wanted. And soon, detectives got even more confirmation of that theory. People who knew him said the same thing. They told investigators that Andy had a way of getting into people's heads and controlling them, something he'd been doing for years, even with those closest to him. But even with all that, police still had no clue where Katie was. The search dragged on, day after day, with no trace of her. But then, finally, investigators caught a break. A local man came forward with a strange story. He said that the morning after Katie went missing, Andy randomly showed up at his house. They didn't know each other, but Andy walked up to him and asked him a weird question. "Do you know when your bins were last emptied?" That immediately raised red flags. Officers rushed over and found that the trash bins outside hadn't been picked up in several days. They started digging through the garbage, and inside one of the bags, they found something chilling. It was stained with blood, and inside were Katie's sandals. A DNA test confirmed that the blood was hers. At that point, detectives were sure of one thing. Katie was gone, and Andy was officially charged with her murder. But there was still one huge problem. They had no idea where her body was. Soon after Andy was formally charged with murder, he told detectives he wanted to talk. And just like before, he changed his story yet again. This time, Andy said he and Katie had gone out to the woods that morning for a picnic. While they were sitting by the fire, Katie spotted a hatchet he'd used to chop some wood. And, according to him, she jokingly dared him to throw it and try to hit a soda can she was holding a few feet away. Andy said he took her up on it, but as he threw the hatchet, Katie suddenly leaned forward, and it struck her in the back of the head. Of course, detectives didn't believe a word of it, but this time, Andy at least admitted where her body was. He said that when Katie collapsed and died, he panicked. There was no cell surface in that part of the forest, and according to him, he didn't have the strength to carry her back to the van. So instead, he decided to bury her right there to keep animals from getting to her body. He said he dug a shallow grave, placed Katie's body inside, and covered it with leaves and branches. Then he marked the spot by tying a plastic bag to a stick, planning to come back later. According to Andy, his plan was to go home, say goodbye to his kids, settle everything, and then just be gone. He also admitted to burning Katie's phone along with some of her other belongings in his fireplace. After that, he scooped up the charred remains and dumped them in a trash bin somewhere around town. After speaking with Andy, police headed back to his house, hoping to uncover something new. This time, forensic experts did manage to find traces of blood inside his washing machine, which belonged to Katie. Meanwhile, the search for Katie's body continued. Investigators focused on locating the stick with the plastic bag Andy claimed he'd used to mark the burial site. But even with that clue, search teams still couldn't find the exact spot. While the search was still underway, detectives uncovered something else. After digging into Andy's online activity, they found that he'd been talking to a number of women on various dating sites, flirting with pretty much anyone who'd respond. He'd even been seeing at least one woman in person. According to their conversations, Andy had told her he owned multiple properties across the country. They were even talking about moving to Scotland together and buying a house. But that wasn't even the most interesting part. As they kept going through his phone, investigators discovered something that changed everything. Based on GPS data, the day before Katie vanished, Andy had stopped by his parents' house, then turned off his phone for about an hour and a half. During that time, his van was caught on several surveillance cameras, heading straight toward the woods. After talking to Andy's parents, police found out that the morning before Katie went missing, he'd borrowed a shovel. That's when it hit them. Andy had probably gone out to the woods that day to dig her grave ahead of time. The next day, after killing Katie and using her phone to message her kids and family, Andy also texted his other girlfriend using his own phone. He told her something had come up with his kids and that he'd have to cancel their date. But that wasn't all. In the Notes app on his phone, investigators found something even more disturbing. Drafts of the exact same messages he'd sent to Katie's children and mother. Digital forensics showed that he'd been editing those drafts over the course of several weeks, tweaking them repeatedly, trying to match Katie's writing style so no one would suspect a thing. And most telling of all was the fact that the word "while" was misspelled in the exact same way it appeared in the final messages. It's also worth noting that the note had been created over a month before the murder, and that proved one thing beyond all doubt. Andy didn't just snap. He'd been planning this for weeks, maybe even longer, carefully laying the groundwork for something he knew he was going to do. When police confronted Andy with the evidence that he'd been in the woods the day before the murder, he claimed he had just gone there to walk his dog, not to dig a grave. Soon, search teams finally found the stick with the plastic bag Andy had mentioned, but there was no grave anywhere nearby. They scoured the area inch by inch, but came up empty. So, detectives made a decision. They brought Andy out to the woods and asked him to show them exactly where he'd buried Katie. Once they got there, Andy pointed to a specific patch of ground, and what shocked everyone was that search teams had already been through that exact spot multiple times, but no one had even considered that a grave could be hidden there. The ground looked completely untouched, flat, smooth, and totally natural. No signs of digging, no shifted soil, nothing out of place. It had been concealed so well. Officers later admitted there was no way they would have ever found it without Andy's help. As soon as the forensic team began digging, they found Katie, right where Andy had said she'd be. But what they uncovered next was something no one expected. Somehow, Andy had managed to bury her beneath a web of tree roots that were growing deep underground. Later, a geology expert explained just how complex that grave actually was. According to him, it would have taken hours to dig something like that. There was no way Andy could have done it in one go, so he'd clearly come back more than once. The expert also pointed out that Andy had separated the soil by layers, then buried them back in the correct order, which is exactly why the grave looked so untouched. That level of planning was chilling. Once Katie's body was recovered, it was handed over to forensic examiners. And right away, Andy's story about the Coke can and the axe throw completely fell apart. Katie had died from blows to the head with a hatchet, but not just one or two. She'd been struck 12 times. By that point, there was no doubt in the detectives' minds. This wasn't an accident. This was cold, calculated, and premeditated murder. With all of that, the prosecution began preparing for trial. The evidence against Andy was overwhelming, more than enough to secure a conviction. But one thing remained unclear: the motive. Investigators believed Andy was fueled by bitterness and resentment. Katie had broken up with him months earlier, and it looked like his ego just couldn't handle the rejection. That bruised pride, they believed, turned into hatred and ultimately led him to kill her. The trial began in November 2022, and at first, Andy pleaded not guilty. But just 3 days in, he suddenly changed course. Out of nowhere, he reversed his plea and admitted to the murder. Unfortunately for Katie's family, he didn't offer any new details, just accepted responsibility. But it was still enough, and in the end, the court sentenced him to life in prison, with the possibility of parole only after 32 years, calling him a deeply dangerous individual. And so, the case was officially closed. But the story surrounding Andy still leaves questions. Given that he was dating multiple women at once and constantly pursuing others through dating apps, it's hard to shake the feeling that Katie may not have been the only one. Everything about him pointed to a man who craved control, who seemed to enjoy manipulating and hurting the women around him. And there's every reason to believe that Katie might not have been the first. Unexplained, Colorado, a city of about 70,000 people that sits about 50 miles north of Denver, home to 65-year-old William Knoll. William had 3 children and 6 grandchildren, and his sister Mary said he was the protector and really the glue of the family. He had a quick wit, and everyone in his circle said his outrageous sense of humor was legendary, as was his love of loud prints on shirts and crazy socks. Travis, William's son, said that his father had worked his whole life, having served in the military and then right into a long career working in tech. He had just received his first Social Security check after finally starting to slow things down and move into retirement. But he didn't want to stop completely. He was a skilled craftsman, and now, with some more time on his hands, he had been working towards opening his own woodworking business. Despite facing difficult times, including fighting cancer, he was always a glass-half-full kind of person. He never asked for help or wanted to be a bother to anyone, and no matter how much was on his plate, he was always the first person to offer you support or advice. As well as trying to build up his little business, William wanted to spend his time focusing on everything that made him happy and didn't want to settle for anything less. Woodworking, tinkering on his car, racquetball, brewing beer, watching sports, and taking walks with his children and grandchildren. In May 2015, he finished his cancer treatment, and his sister Mary, who had been living with him, moved out so his granddaughter Sadie and her family could move in. And now, after he had finished his last round of chemotherapy, he wanted all the celebrations with his favorite people around him. 1 month later, June 3, 2015, 10:30 p.m., William set out on a late-night walk, just listening to his music and enjoying a minute to himself. He often walked late at night to help him wind down so he could get a good night's sleep. It was less than a mile from his downtown Loveland home, and a walk he had taken 100 times with his grandchildren. But just before 11 p.m., things would take a quick and dark turn. "Hello, there's a man lying here on the corner of St. Louis. He does not appear to be breathing, and he is bleeding uncontrollably. Do you know why he's bleeding?" "No, I have no idea. I just saw him flying here on the sidewalk as I was driving by, and I thought I'd fall over to see if he's doing okay." "Okay. All right, we do have help on the way." On the corner of First Street and St. Louis Avenue in Loveland, William was found bleeding on the ground. His earphones were still in, music playing. Despite their best efforts, it was too late. William was pronounced dead at the scene. He had been shot at pretty close range with a shotgun, and the wound showed he had been shot at a downward angle, possibly from a moving vehicle. When his granddaughter Sadie got the call from her mom in the middle of the night, she just remembered hearing "Papa's gone," over and over. "Where did he go?" Sadie asked, confused. It was just total disbelief when she realized. She said it just didn't make sense. Why would someone, out of everybody, take my papa's life? William had no enemies, no problems with anyone. Everyone that knew him was just as shocked. A 65-year-old man in Loveland is dead, apparently shot while just walking along a sidewalk. "And Kelly, I just came outside. I was able to speak with police. I'm told the public information officer has not been updated on this case for about 5 hours. They're trying to decide right now how they're going to update the media. They're getting a lot of questions. This is clearly the developing story here in northern Colorado." Also, just a few minutes ago, we had a chance to talk with people who identify themselves as friends and family of the victim. They are clearly distraught, still trying to take this all in. We found them very, very close to the scene itself. A greenhouse at East First Street and Taylor Avenue, 1 to 2 blocks away at the most from where this man, 65 years old, was found just before 11 p.m. shot. Police say he did not survive. Neighbors saying he was also recently in a car accident, lived very close. Also, we're told from residents in this area, this is clearly the #1 discussion among friends and also folks at the grocery store. Honestly, if someone was shooting around here, I think that would be connected because, like I said, nothing happens around here. I haven't heard a gunshot here in my life. All his belongings had been with him too, so it wasn't a robbery-related shooting. Was it a case of mistaken identity, perhaps? One of the residents' window faced the intersection when she heard a loud popping sound that night. She saw an old, fairly run-down and rusty light-colored pickup truck speeding away from the scene. Investigators also learned that just 10 minutes before William was shot, Shots had also been fired at a motorcyclist very close to where William was killed. Donald Chronister had been on his bike and shot at 10:31 p.m. He had been trailed by a truck matching the same description as the one the witness saw. It was an older model, possibly 70s, and a "Be on the lookout" was issued. Fortunately, Donald had escaped without injury, with the bullets just grazing his back. But it seemed as if their suspect was just someone driving around, shooting people at random. Spent shell casings nearby showed them that they were looking for an 18-inch, 12-gauge shotgun in both shootings. Detectives also had a really strong lead with this truck. They just needed some footage from somewhere to hopefully show the driver and/or the number plate. A camera on a liquor store showed William strolling along with his big jacket on and hood up. It was 10:41 p.m. No one was following him on foot and the street looked quiet. Less than 30 seconds later, the pickup truck came into frame, heading in the same direction as William. It looked like the truck was going far slower than it should have been for the road it was on, just like it was following William specifically. Just a minute later, the same truck turned around and came back into the same camera's view, going up a different street at a much quicker speed now. Sadie said that after her grandfather was killed, everything really changed in their once so safe-feeling community. No one played outside anymore, no one walked by themselves, and the streets were pretty much empty as soon as it got dark. The investigating team had pursued over 5,000 leads and conducted over 1,000 interviews. They also looked at 14,000 pickup trucks with similarities to the suspect's vehicle and processed more than 300,000 phone numbers and cleared 12 persons of interest. Although police said these sorts of crimes were rare in Loveland, cyclist John Jacoby had been shot dead on a rural road in Windsor, Colorado on May 18th, and a month before that, Corey Romero was shot in the neck on a major highway near Windsor. Miraculously, she survived. John, Corey, William, and Donald, all four appeared to have been shot from a moving vehicle and within the same 15-mile radius. So was there a link? Good afternoon. My name is David Moore. I'm the Public Information Officer for the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. I'm also the spokesperson for the Northern Colorado Community Task Force. We appreciate everyone being here today to help us share this information with the community. We also appreciate the continued support of the community as investigators work tirelessly to solve these cases. The task force believes these cases will be solved with the help of the community. Shootings of number 1 and number 2 both appear to be random in nature and have been linked by forensic evidence. They have not been linked to any other cases under investigation by the task force. Shooting number 3 occurred on June 3, 2015, when a person was shot at while riding a motorcycle near Denver Avenue and East 18th Street in Loveland. So here's a map indicating the suspect's direction of travel for shooting number 3 of the person on the motorcycle. Shooting number 4 also occurred on June 3, 2015, when Mr. William Knoll was shot and killed while standing at the intersection of East 1st Street and North St. Louis Avenue in Loveland. Shootings number 3 and number 4 both appear to be random in nature and have been linked by forensic evidence. They have not been linked to any other cases being investigated by the task force. In June of 2015, the task force released information regarding a vehicle of interest after shootings number 3 and number 4. A depiction of an orange 1973 to 1979 Chevrolet or GMC pickup was released to the public. The question is often raised regarding the possibility the pickup truck has been painted or altered in other ways. The task force has certain characteristics they use to eliminate potential suspect vehicles. However, color is no longer one of them. The task force has received numerous requests from the media regarding crucial evidence in these cases. Those requests include the types of firearms used to commit these crimes, the distances from which they were fired, and the number of times they were fired. The Coloradoan recently requested the task force to confirm that Mr. William Knoll was shot at close range with a shotgun from a vehicle. The task force requests that you call the task force tip line at 970-498-5599. Weeks became months, and then it was a year. And finally, they got something. Employees at a Loveland bank reported to police that the truck they were looking for matched the description of one they knew. Christopher Parker was the name linked to the truck, and they recognized it because he had caused a commotion in the bank, accusing them of taking his money. According to Christopher's Facebook page, he had owned a ready, orangey old truck in 2015, but but after the sketches and Beyond the Lookout started circulating, he had painted it white, documenting all of this on social media. When detectives reached his home and found the truck, they could still see patches of the once bright color showing through the white. The pot of half-used white paint was still sat in his tool shed. Police said he had an arsenal of weapons, had made multiple threats against businesses, and had been placed on a 72-hour hold in a mental health facility. He had made further threats towards the facility. Despite this, though, he did have a very minor criminal record, which included operation of an unsafe vehicle and a misdemeanor possession of drug paraphernalia. Nothing even close to this kind of level of serious crimes they were investigating. Not much is really out there about Christopher, but Chrissy Allen was friends with his cousin and knew him a little bit. She described him as a lonely musician, but she didn't see him get upset or get violent. She added, Chrissy said it was clear from the last communication she had with him he was dealing with some mental health issues. Detectives asked him to come and answer some questions and showed him the CCTV. Christopher admitted to being in the area and briefly following Donald on his bike. He also said he saw a person crossing the street, which was likely William, but he seemed to know a lot of information about the shootings that had not been released to the public, such as William having his headphones in. He also admitted that he had purchased a shotgun, but swore he returned it to Walmart the same day he bought it. But Walmart had no record of said return, and a store representative at the time said they had a strict policy against accepting any firearm returns. And on the receipt, a receipt that Christopher had even signed, it clearly stated this rule. The receipt also showed the type of shotgun he'd bought, and it was an exact match to the one they were looking for, an 18-inch 12-gauge shotgun. The more Christopher talked, the more inconsistencies started to appear in his stories. He then asked for a lawyer, and that was the end of the conversation. He was arrested on March 13, 2018, on suspicion of first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. As reported yesterday, on March 13 at 1 p.m., task force investigators arrested Christopher David Parker, a 35-year-old male Loveland resident, for the murder of Mr. William Knoll and the attempted murder of a male motorcyclist who escaped injury when he was shot at approximately 15 minutes prior to the death of Mr. Knoll on June 3, 2015. This arrest is a result of an extensive 2-year, 8-month investigation. Keep in mind the Jacobus and all the victims that have been affected by these murders, including this guy's mother. Keep everyone who has been touched by all of this in your prayers, and let's hope that and pray that we'll continue to find more information and bring justice for the Jacobus and the rest of the victims. He was just a guy walking down the street. He was my older brother. He was a father. He was a grandfather. He was like your brother, and has involved thousands of man-hours. We are not finished. I just got off the phone with one of William Knoll's family members. They tell me police made an arrest in his murder, and we know a 35-year-old man is in custody. He's from Loveland and charged with murder for a date that matches the shooting. Police are not yet confirming the connection or saying if they believe he's the guy behind all 6 shootings. It's crazy, you know? People are getting, technically sniped off I-25, 4 months. Northern Colorado felt a chill following a string of 6 random shootings in 2015. Despite this distinct sketch of the suspect's orange pickup truck, a $50,000 reward, and task force dedicated to finding the killer, the case went cold. Now a possible break. This is video of 35-year-old Christopher Parker in court today. He's from Loveland and facing first-degree murder and attempted murder charges. The crimes police arrested him for happened on June 3, 2015. That is the same date 65-year-old William Knoll was shot and killed in Loveland. The same night a motorcyclist was shot at, but not injured. And there are no records of any other murder or attempted murder in Loveland on that date. The Northern Colorado Task Force has not confirmed the connection with this latest arrest, but they are holding a press conference tomorrow where we hope to learn more. Despite a huge amount of evidence, a long 5 years would have to tick by before any movement at all. While investigators believed he was responsible for 2 of the now 6 shootings they had been looking into, there is no evidence to suggest, nor is there any information to believe, that Mr. Parker is responsible for the April 22, 2015 shooting of Miss Corey Romero, or for the May 18, 2015 shooting and murder of Mr. John Jacoby. To date, there is also no information or evidence that Mr. Parker is responsible for the September 13, 2015 shooting of an unoccupied school in North Loveland, or the shooting of a second-floor window at on-duty employees that occurred at Banner Health Hospital in Fort Collins that same evening. All 4 of these cases remain open and unsolved. The task force also made clear they have no evidence to connect Parker to any of the 4 other shootings that rocked northern Colorado in 2015. Our next objective is to stand on the footsteps of the Windsor Police Department at some point in the future and deliver the same kind of news that we've been able to solve that homicide as well. Christopher was later diagnosed with schizophrenia in 2017, and his case was delayed several times as he underwent more mental competency evaluations. Things got longer still when lockdown started. In December 2018, he was declared mentally incompetent to stand trial, so another competency evaluation was ordered. The program he was placed on required mental health officials to report to the courts every 3 months about his state of mind. A few months later, in June 2019, he was yet again declared mentally incompetent and was now refusing to take his medication, but the prosecution were not letting up. David Frank was William's longtime friend, and he said the waiting and being in limbo was mentally draining. I've been here for 5 years, sitting pretty much in the same spot month after month, year after year. I've been wrapping my head around this for a long time. I can't think of anything worse than taking someone else's life, let alone my best friend. Finally, in June 2021, Christopher was deemed competent and they could proceed with his trial. He first pleaded not guilty to everything, but the trial would never happen as he changed his plea to guilty of the lesser charge of second-degree murder. The prosecution dropped the attempted murder charges as well. He was facing between 16 and 40 years. A man from Loveland is starting a nearly 40-year prison sentence tonight for a murder 8 years ago. Christopher Parker pleaded guilty to the killing, part of a series of random shootings in 2015 that triggered a special task force to investigate. Today, a judge sentenced Parker to 39 years. He shot and killed William Knoll as he was standing on the side of the street. Parker is also accused of firing at a person on a motorcycle about 15 minutes after that, but that person wasn't hurt. The shootings followed 2 other shootings on roads in Larimer and Weld counties that spring. The earlier shootings are still unsolved, with a $50,000 reward from the FBI still standing. In June 2023, the now 40-year-old was sentenced to serve 39 years in prison, with the judge giving him the almost absolute max she could. And it was almost exactly 8 years since William had been murdered. Sheriff John Fyan said this outcome delivers justice to a man who terrorized our community, but the irreparable harm he caused can never be reversed. The name of this murderer is not worth repeating, but Mr. Knoll's legacy will live on here in Larimer County, as we remember the positive impact he made on all who knew him. In terms of any kind of motive, that is still up for speculation, as he has never said why he did what he did that night. It was as random and cold-blooded as you could get. Some detectives think that after John and Corey were shot, and that made the news, Christopher potentially wanted to be a copycat shooter. As well as raising money towards his funeral, William's family planned for memorial contributions and donations be made in his name and go towards a future fund with the Thompson Education Foundation. This would encourage the exposure of aged children in the local school districts to mathematics and science. He loved nothing more than teaching his children and grandchildren everything he knew, and this was a lovely tribute. They were also able to put a bench in his name at the college he graduated from. Mary said Christopher created generations of pain, generations of trauma. William's absence has been thunderous. We have been blown apart. His granddaughter Sadie said even though he isn't with everyone, she still looks up to him. He was and always will be her idol and the person she models herself on each and every day. The level of the offender's culpability in the commission of the offense is so extreme that the community interest in retribution, punishment, community protection, and deterrence can only be met by a sentence of life imprisonment. The manner in which he killed her was cruel, merciless, and abhorrent. The offender's crime falls within the worst category of murder. That case takes us to Sydney, Australia, and back to the 27th of April, 2010, 6:30 p.m. The streets around Chatswood were peaceful. People were coming home from work and getting ready to settle in for the evening. That was until the desperate screams of a woman shattered the stillness. A couple walking their dog along Holland Street went over to investigate. They saw a man wearing a green hooded jacket and carrying a backpack, running away from the house the screaming had come from. They had tried to challenge him, but he quickly ran off and disappeared. As the couple moved closer to the house, they found a woman on the veranda. She had suffered horrific injuries, and it was clear that nothing could be done to save her. Michelle Beets had been murdered on her own doorstep. Michelle had just arrived home from work at the Royal North Shore Hospital. She had been born in New Zealand and attended Epsom Girls Grammar School in Auckland, and later worked in the heart department at Green Lane Hospital. Since moving to Sydney, she had worked in the emergency department at Royal North Shore Hospital for 25 years, and the past 10 years had been as a nurse unit manager. As with all jobs in healthcare, it was extremely hard and stressful. It was long hours with massive workloads, but Michelle took it all in her stride. She was described as quiet and reserved, but she didn't take nonsense from anyone. Michelle was very popular and well-respected amongst her peers. This was what made the news of her murder so hard to process. Who on earth would want to hurt her, and hurt her so violently? Police thought maybe she had disturbed someone robbing her house, but this theory was quickly shut down. The electricity to her house had been cut off deliberately at a junction box by the front door. This meant that both the outdoor sensor light and the alarm system to the property had been disabled. Her shed door also appeared to have been tampered with. She had been ambushed in a planned attack. Her throat had been cut and she had been stabbed multiple times in her chest, head and throat, before being left to bleed to death on her veranda. The police began looking into the personal records of staff members at the hospital. Michelle had reported drugs being stolen, and a member of staff had been fired as a result. Maybe a disgruntled former colleague would have a motive. The area was cordoned off, and officers began the painstaking task of hunting for clues. More than 20 markers led away from the property, heading along the footpath in the direction of Johnson Street. It was reported that they indicated the path her killer had taken as he ran away. The police also appealed for the public's help in tracking down this man. Michelle's day had been a typical one. She had gone to work and then stopped to get groceries on the way back to the home she shared with her partner David, who was very quickly ruled out as being involved. Chatswood was a low-crime area. It was a safe neighborhood, so people were understandably stunned and very frightened, and for her colleagues at the hospital, they were completely crushed. NSW Health called her a valued and esteemed colleague, friend, and mentor. She was an exemplary nurse, a dear friend and teammate. We are devastated by her loss. Dr. Robert Day, the deputy director of the emergency department she worked in, said the department had lost a friend and leader. There was speculation that a patient with mental health problems had killed her, but the police were quick to dispute that. That is not correct, Superintendent Terrence Dalton said. It's an ongoing homicide investigation. Police are looking into the victimology of the victim, which includes looking into her complete background, everything about her. A number of her work colleagues have been interviewed thus far. Statements have been taken, her family have been spoken to, and the police will continue along those lines of inquiry. They also shut down rumors that David was in protective custody. On the night she was killed, she was due to have dinner with David and an old friend, Franz, someone she had grown up with. Franz was over in Australia for a dragon boat racing competition, and they had arranged to meet up and have a long overdue catch-up. He would cancel the dinner and return to New Zealand, and he was left in total shock when he found out what had happened to his friend. The gruesome way she died is unbelievable, he said. In speaking to people, one name had come up. Michelle had told people she worked with at the hospital that a man had been starting to freak her out. 48-year-old Walter Marsh. Walter Marsh was a former U.S. Marine. He had worked at the Royal North Shore Hospital with Michelle. He had arrived in Sydney in February the previous year and had a 12-month contract with the hospital. He said that he could remember seeing Michelle a few times while he worked there, but he said they hadn't fallen out or anything of the sort. But upon digging further, this didn't appear to be true. He had been on a 12-month contract, but in early 2010, this hadn't been renewed. He blamed Michelle for this. He believed that she had given him bad references, which stopped him from finding further employment. He needed a job to be able to stay in Australia. He didn't want to go back to the United States, as he had a massive child support bill waiting for him. He was a firm person of interest, and he certainly did seem to have a motive for wanting to hurt Michelle. Walter had gone back to the hospital just a few days after the murder, but this time as a patient, as he had suffered a seizure. Her colleagues were treating the man they knew was the prime suspect in her killing. Even though his name and identity were not being released at this point, he did continue to speak to the media, who blurred his face. He denied any involvement. "Did you kill Michelle Bate?" "No." He said he liked Michelle and he enjoyed the people he worked with. "I enjoyed the eclectic mix of personalities and thought we all got along wonderfully," he said. He added that he thought he was being targeted because he was not Australian. He was adamant that he was innocent. He said the police had made up their minds that he was involved, but he had nothing to do with it. "I'm not a killer, and I certainly would never harm a woman," he said. "The police think that just because I have a military background that I am a killer. I'm not." He said that Michelle had been the one to interview him over the phone when he was in America for the job, and she had sponsored his visa. He said that although his contract hadn't been renewed, this hadn't jeopardized his visa, and he bore no grudge towards Michelle. His apartment was also searched over the course of 3 days, hoping that vital clues or evidence would be found. He said that on the night of the murder, he had met his wife at a nearby train station at around 7 p.m., after she had finished work and they had gone home together. But how did he account for the fact that there was CCTV footage of him throwing a backpack away into a bin at a local shopping center? "I was always going to throw away that bag. It's no big deal," he said. To try and find the backpack, the police searched through tons of rubbish across various sites, but found nothing. Even though the police had spoken to him twice, there was not enough evidence to charge him. But that would soon change. The investigation into Walter continued, and the police finally got the lead they had been looking for. He was taken to the station for a third time. "Did you know where she lived?" "No." "No? No." "You ever been to a house?" "No." "Were you ever trying to use knives?" "No." In his police interview, Walter Marsh said he was astounded when he heard about the murder of his former boss. "I was horrified." "Horrified? It was terrible that somebody would do that." "Did you murder Michelle Boots?" "No." The officers also spoke to his wife. She said that, on the night of the murder, just half an hour after the fact, he had said to her, "I did it. It's done. The bitch is gone. No more bad references." He also practiced throat-slitting techniques on his wife and brother-in-law, techniques used by the Marines to kill someone quickly and quietly. Walter Marsh was subsequently arrested at his Lane Cove apartment, and 3 weeks after the killing, he was charged with the murder of Michelle Beats. He was refused bail. A former U.S. Marine will stand trial for the murder of Michelle Beats. Walter Marsh is accused of killing the nursing manager with a knife at her Chatswood home in April. His wife and brother-in-law gave evidence against him at a committal hearing. They said he practiced his knife technique at home and hated his former boss. A magistrate today referred the case to trial in the Supreme Court. Michelle's brother Marty said the news of him being charged was fantastic. "Of course, we must now see justice do its course. We just have to let the police do what they do, let the law do what it does, and it probably won't be long until it goes to court that you're believing it's happening." Michelle's father Robbie said he was happy with the news, but did express enormous empathy for Walter's family too. "I feel sorry for Mr. Marsh's wife and for his family in the U.S. I hope the trial will be speedy, correct, and come to a proper end," he said. Walter Marsh, a 49-year-old former U.S. Marine, is due to face a committal hearing. Next month, he hasn't yet entered a plea to the charge of murder. Documents tendered to the court say that Walter Marsh's wife and brother-in-law are due to testify against him. The papers reveal that the case against Mr. Marsh will include admissions he allegedly made to his wife about the killing. Walter had no reply to the charges, and the judge accepted this silence as a plea of not guilty, meaning that this would be going to trial. He was also found to not have any substantial impairment or mental illness. The man accused of murdering Sydney nurse Michelle Beats is on life support after a failed suicide attempt. Walter Marsh was rushed to hospital on Saturday morning after he was found in his prison cell with his wrists and throat cut. A suicide note was reportedly also found in the cell. Marsh is alleged to have stalked and then killed Michelle Beets at her Chatswood home in April this year. After the attempt on his life had failed, and he was released from hospital, the trial of Walter Marsh would begin. It would emerge that Walter had actually been planning this and stalking Michelle for weeks. He had observed her house to work out what security systems she may have had and what the layout inside was. Walter wanted to know what her pattern and her routine was, so he would call her home phone multiple times each day from payphones to see when she usually got back. She even saw him on her street on one occasion. This was why she had told colleagues he was really starting to freak her out. On the day of the murder, Michelle had changed her routine. Instead of driving into her driveway, she had backed in instead, meaning that she had come face to face with him. He had sat in wait with a balaclava over his face. He even had his knife sharpened in preparation. It also emerged that he had asked his brother-in-law to go with him to Michelle's house to keep watch for him, and he had also bought clothes from a second-hand store to wear specifically during the murder. He had told her that if she stopped screaming, he wouldn't hurt her, but he then slit her throat using the technique he had learned in the military and repeatedly stabbed her. The prosecution argued that Walter had developed a deep resentment and hatred of Michelle, as he believed that she had given him bad references which had stopped him from finding a job. He had referred to her as a fucking bitch on more than one occasion and said she needed to be gone. Michelle's partner, David Grant, was there for the start of the trial, which he says presents the opportunity for justice. Investigators claim Marsh had cut off the power to the house and broken a back door to make it look like a break-in. This is the couple that discovered Michelle Beets' bloodied body on her front doorstep last year. Carmel and Gordon Bevan had been walking down Holland Street when they say they heard a woman scream, then the sound of slapping. Mr. Bevan said when he felt for Miss Beets' pulse, he felt the gash in her neck. He says she turned towards him as if she was trying to speak. Then, after they made eye contact, she died. The couple are two of 70 witnesses expected to be called in the trial of Walter Marsh. The two key witnesses in the trial are Marsh's Vietnamese wife Samantha and her brother. The jury heard 3 weeks after the incident. Samantha told police Marsh had confessed. The court heard Samantha Marsh and her brother had reason to lie. After cooperating with police, they both received protection from prosecution for concealing a serious offense. Mrs. Marsh also received a visa to stay in Australia and money for accommodation. The jury was shown security camera footage, which showed a man walking around Chatswood in the hour following the murder. Detective Senior Constable Scott Bennett, who worked on the case, took the jury through the footage, which started at around 6:30 p.m. The man was dressed in a white shirt with black bottoms and was carrying both a bum bag and a plastic bag as he walked west on Victoria Avenue and headed into the Chatswood shopping center. He went into an accessible toilet and then into the men's toilet before going to the food court and putting things into the rubbish bins. Scott Bennett said that Walter had significantly altered his appearance since his arrest, but he believed he was the man on the footage. Police claim Marsh was captured on CCTV at Chatswood Chase Shopping Center about an hour after the alleged murder, but his lawyer told the court the figure in the video may not be his client, adding the place is well lit with people around and whoever committed that murder would have been covered in blood. The court heard that Walter, who had been born in Belfast, had told his wife that he had permission to kill from an organization. His wife said that around a month before the murder, he had said, "Finally, I got permission from the organization in Ireland to kill Michelle Beets." Samantha Marsh says about a week before the death, her husband bought a set of unusual clothes, some shoes and a pair of rubber gloves. Mrs. Marsh said she saw her husband wear the outfit once, but then never saw the clothes or the gloves again. Mrs. Marsh added on the 27th of April last year, her husband told her he changed in a nearby garage, then got rid of his old clothes, the gloves, and the knife. It also emerged that in the weeks before Michelle's murder, Walter had been plotting another one, that of his ex-wife back in the United States. The prosecutor said he had flown back to America with the intention of murdering his first wife because of his unpaid $50,000 child support bill. But ultimately it didn't happen and he didn't kill his ex-wife. It shows some degree of pre-planning, the prosecutor said. He thought he would solve the problem by murdering his ex-wife. Then it turned to murdering Michelle Beets. In November, the jury had reached their verdict. Guilty verdict in the trial of the man accused of murdering Sydney nurse Michelle Beets. 10's Gabrielle Boyle has been following the case and she joins us now. Gabrielle, Walter Marsh has always maintained his innocence. So how did he react to this conviction? When the guilty verdict was handed down, a loud round of applause erupted from the public gallery. The family and friends of Michelle Beets were clearly absolutely delighted with the result. It has to be said, though, the reaction of the murderer was quite bizarre to say the very least. He smiled, he giggled. He joked with his lawyer, he acted very casual. He took repeated sips of water, sat back in the dock and looked very relaxed. As he was led away to his cell, interestingly, he made a tut-tut-tutang motion to the victim's friends and family. What exactly that was meant to mean, perhaps we will never know. After an unimaginable loss, a small measure of relief for the family and friends of Michelle Beets. I'm personally very relieved at the result today. It's been a long, hard 18 months for myself, Michelle's family and friends. We just want you to know what a beautiful, wonderful person she was. And she's so sadly missed. The face of a killer with no remorse. Justice Derek Price said nothing other than the maximum penalty was appropriate for his barbaric crime. The level of the offender's culpability in the commission of the offense is so extreme that the community interest in retribution, punishment, community protection, and deterrence can only be met by a sentence of life imprisonment. He told his wife that he wanted to confront Ms. Beets by pretending to distribute Mormon books and by wearing a Mormon uniform to freak her out and scare her. However, his intention became an intention to kill. The manner in which he killed her was cruel, merciless, and abhorrent. The offender's crime falls within the worst category of murder. I'm just happy that he's off the streets and can't cause any more harm to anyone else. I agree with Justice Price that it certainly was in the worst category. It's unclear if Walter Marsh was even listening to what was being said inside court. He ignored a request by the judge for him to stand for his final sentence and had to be prompted by his lawyer. Marsh could appeal against the severity of his sentence, but David Grant says he hopes today's judgment will see any such challenge fail. Carl Herr, ABC News, Sydney. This wasn't just a victory for her family, but also for the police who would help bring him to justice. Although nothing was going to bring Michelle back, knowing that the person who had killed her would now spend the rest of his life behind bars did bring some degree of comfort. As previously said, Walter Marsh had been speaking to the media, and one of them was journalist Clementine Cuneo, and she had an extraordinary story to tell about her interactions with Walter Marsh. Over 2 weeks in March last year, I formed an uncomfortable bond with Marsh. We spoke often over the phone as he repeatedly denied he was the killer. Then, one Tuesday, as I visited the hairdresser, he called again. He said he needed to tell me something, and that it wasn't particularly good. As he spoke, he began explaining to me that when people are desperate, they do desperate things. He rambled incoherently for a few minutes, but I kept listening, keen to work out what he was on about. I needed the money, Marsh said. Then the penny dropped. I asked Marsh, Walter, what are you saying to me? He replied, I had to do it for the money. At that moment, I realized I was hearing the confession of the killer. I told him he shouldn't be telling me this, that he must call the police. He went on, I have cancer, so I'm going to die anyway. My wife wants to go back to Vietnam to start a business. The money is for her. It was a contract killing, Marsh tried to convince me. I cut the conversation short. I felt completely uncomfortable and quite scared by what I'd been told, and I called the police. That night, I received 2 more calls from Marsh urging me, meet him. I agreed and went to his home briefly the next morning with a photographer. What I wasn't aware of at the time was police were already interviewing Marsh's wife and brother-in-law. Their evidence, plus Marsh's phone call to me, was enough to arrest and charge him with murder. For years after he was convicted, Walter Marsh launched an appeal against his sentence. The aim was to get the term reduced to a minimum of 24 years. His lawyers argued that certain evidence surrounding his training with using knives whilst in the Marine Corps should not have been admitted in the trial. There are no striking similarities between the method Marsh was allegedly taught to inflict and the wounds inflicted upon the deceased, it was argued. It was also argued that the sentence of life was manifestly excessive. They said there had been no torture prior to the murder, no sexual motive, no more than one victim, and Walter had a clean criminal record. Justice Harrison said that the murder demonstrated a high level of planning and was clearly a sustained and merciless attack upon an innocent and defenseless victim. These matters combined to raise the awful specter of future dangerousness to the community, he said. For those reasons, the appeal was rejected and the original sentence stood. Speaking outside court, David said he was relieved by the outcome. April 2020. 59-year-old Walter Marsh was found dead in his cell at Lithgow Correctional Center. He was found at 8:20 a.m. and no cause of death was immediately given, but it was later reported he had taken his own life. Michelle Beats's funeral had been attended by more than 1,000 people. It was clear just how much of an impact she had had in her community. Following her death, the Michelle Beats Award for Inspirational Pediatric Care was founded. It aims to recognize the achievement of individuals who go above and beyond to advance children's health in New South Wales. Adding, Michelle was deeply committed to nursing practice education and demonstrated the highest standard of nursing professionalism, investing in the best level of care for all patients. Those who win the Michelle Beats Award each receive $25,000 worth of medical equipment for their hospital via the Humpty Dumpty Foundation, as well as a $5,000 bursary for professional development, training, or research. Though her life was tragically cut short, Michelle's legacy continues to live on. Her legacy lives on not just in the award, but in the lives she touched throughout her many years in healthcare. Every patient she cared for, every colleague she supported and helped, every act of kindness and selflessness she displayed, they are echoes of a life spent in service to others. And while justice was done, and may bring some degree of peace, it is her compassion, her dedication, and her humanity that continue to endure. In the summer of 2011, 23-year-old Daylene Carlson moved from her small town in Idaho to Stockton, California. Sporty, sociable, and adventurous, Daylene enjoyed snowboarding, fishing, camping, and long walks with her dog Maddie. Daylene had decided to relocate to Stockton to move in with her aunt and cousin. She was here for one thing and one thing only, to further her career. After years and years of saving up from her various restaurant jobs, she had enrolled at San Joaquin Delta College to major in child development. And with just a few months to go before college started, Daylene was busy putting names to new faces and getting to know the area. Her cousin Cecily was always her tour guide, but on August 6, 2011, Daylene would venture out alone. Cecily had a fever, but Daylene still wanted to go out. She had made some new friends already, and ever the confident person, she was happy to go out by herself to places she was familiar with. One of those places was Finnegan's Bar and Grill, which had fast become a favorite night out for her. The 23-year-old got ready and said her goodbyes. As she shut the door, her Aunt Maggie shouted to her that she needed to be home by 3 a.m. at the absolute latest. Daylene agreed and walked off into the town. But 3 a.m. would soon come and go. Soon it was 3.30 and then 4. Maggie was still awake and texting Daylene to see if everything was okay. Hoping she had slept at a friend's house, Maggie tried to get some rest, but with every hour that ticked by without the sound of the door opening, she was waking up, tossing and turning. The sun soon rose along with everyone else's concern. If Daylene had spent the night at a friend's house, she would have found a way to charge her phone and contact people. Safe to say, sometimes you just know when you know, and something was seriously wrong. Maggie called around her daughter and niece's friends before she decided to call 911 and report Daylene as missing. And with this, just a couple of months after she moved, the 23-year-old had disappeared. Unfortunately, it was too early to file an official report, but police logged it anyway, and her family and friends started looking around the streets for her. But as it went from hot and light to cool and dark, there was no sign of her. The following morning, the police got to work. Daylene had asked Cecily to take a picture of her before she left the house, so Daylene could look at her outfit. Her dark brown hair had been down, and she was wearing a black and white vest top with ripped blue denim jeans. Armed with this, the officers started with Daylene's original plan for the evening. She was supposed to go to Finnegan's Bar and Grill with Cecily. One of the managers at Finnegan's Bar remembered her. Daylene had been there many times before, and he said she had been stood outside most of the night, but nothing had seemed out of the ordinary. Daleen had picked up a ride there with a friend, and once at the bar she bumped into her on-off boyfriend, Jacob Evangelisti. 25-year-old Jacob admitted we weren't on the best terms. I purposely got there before she did. She came up to me to talk to me. He said the couple had got into quite a big fight 4 days before. He was drunk and grabbed Dalian's arm as she tried to get away from him. He said he had heard from people that she had been talking to a mutual friend called James Cousins, and safe to say things between the pair had been far from good. Jacob said they hung out with a few friends that night, but were keeping their distance. That was until Daleen actually broke up with him. He was upset and wanted to work things out, but it seemed she was done. Jacob maintained Daleen had left the bar before him, but he didn't see if anyone was with her. His story did match with employees. However, police said both Jacob and James Cousins were persons of interest. The cameras in the building showed Daleen outside for a while smoking, before moving back inside at about 10 to 1 in the morning. There were quite a few people around, and at one point a man even put his arm around her for a moment, before walking behind her in the corridor. He was 25-year-old Jason Gilly, another mutual friend. He even lived with James Cousins. Daleen then went back outside, where she spoke to Jacob. She looked animated and was moving her arms around a lot. This matched what Jacob had said to them about having a heated conversation. She went inside again and Jacob stayed put with a friend, finishing his cigarette. 3 a.m. Finnegan's was closed and everyone had gone. Daleen had somehow left without being caught on any camera, as had Jacob, so they didn't know what time she was there until Jacob told police that Daleen had texted him saying that she was leaving the bar to go to a party at a friend's house. He then had about 12 calls from her after she left the bar. During one of the brief calls, he heard a man's voice in the background. Daleen said she was drinking at Jason's house. Jason was Jason Gilly, who lived with James Cousins. Jason was the man seen putting his arm around Daleen and Finnegan's. In one text early in the morning, Daleen asked Jacob if she could go to his house later, and he had agreed. But hours passed and he didn't hear anything else, falling asleep and waking up to nothing more on his phone. Police next wanted to talk to Jason Gilly and James Cousins. Jason Gilly shared the house with his mom, grandma, and James, who was also staying there too. James was pretty upfront and to the point. Yes, he and Daleen had been chatting, but nothing was official and they weren't in a relationship. He was also quickly able to prove that he was out of Stockton on a trip, something corroborated by multiple people. Jason Gilly also said he couldn't help the police. He said the pair had parted ways at the bar. He had offered her a lift home, but had to leave without her at 1 a.m. because his grandmother had texted him that his young son was sick. But Jacob said Daleen told him she was drinking at Jason Gilly's house. His grandma said Jason had arrived back home himself at about 1:30 a.m. Jason then pointed the detectives back to Jacob and the fight he and Daleen had had. He actually had witnessed the whole thing and said it was pretty bad. So police were really no further forward. Also new tonight, the search is intensifying for a Stockton woman who mysteriously disappeared after a night out. 23-year-old Daleen Carlson was last seen on August 7th. At the start of this case, 3 men talked to police and said they had contact with Carlson the night she disappeared. "We just want her home safe." Carlson's cousins held a flyer displaying her photos today. The family has been fraught with worry since Carlson disappeared last weekend. She was last seen at Finnegan's Pub and Grill very early last Sunday morning. I just want my family to, have peace and get my aunt, get her daughter home. We hope. There's a hope that we would love to find her safe. But as time progresses, it looks more grim. For now, investigators plan to be here all afternoon, and we're told that Carlson moved here from Idaho to start a new life. She had plans to attend Delta College and was living with family when she disappeared. Meanwhile, family and friends were working hard to raise some money, managing to get $1,000 together to add to the Crime Stoppers' already $1,000 reward for information. A local semi-pro football team wanted to host a game and raffle to raise more money, and everyone was out giving out flyers and searching. But things were really not looking good. Friends said having to talk your brain out of every single possible scenario is exhausting and scary. That not knowing, trying to connect the dots that may or may not exist, creating lines to read in between, to maybe figure something out, is all-consuming. But when someone is missing, your mind is constantly going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Unfortunately, investigators had exhausted all of their leads from Finnegan's, so they had to move elsewhere. Going from business to business in the area asking for any and all camera footage, they finally got a lead from a 24-hour food for less store. At 1:30 a.m., the camera showed Daleen and a man buying some alcohol in there. It was Jason Gilly, the same man that had told them he had left her at the bar and hadn't seen her since. The police took him in for questioning a second time because now he had been caught in a pretty big lie, but they gave him a chance to come clean. "What time did you get home?" "About 1:20, 1:30. When he confirmed his original story of being home at 1:30 a.m., they showed him the CCTV footage. "We know a lot more." Jason then suddenly remembered that he had gone to buy some Jaeger with Daleen at Food for Less, but he said he had dropped her back off at Finnegan's before heading home. Detectives could tell there was definitely more to his story, and as they pressed him more, he started getting teary. He admitted that they had gone to his house, where they had had consensual sex. But he said she was angry after and seemed to regret sleeping with him, so she decided to walk home. He followed her in his car, picked her up and drove her 40 miles south, dropping her off at a random place at her request and then getting gas. He said he felt horrible about his decision, and as the days passed, the more worried he became. Knowing he was seemingly the last person to see her, he had lied to protect himself. The police felt in their guts that Daleen was dead, and they bluntly came out and asked Jason where her body was. "Where are we going to find her body? Help us find her. Help us bring her home. Her family deserves it. Do you have it for her? She has a passion, is there? I know that she does. Do her. Jason, don't do this. Please, really." It was here, just as they felt they might be getting somewhere, Jason asked for a lawyer. Investigators arrested 25-year-old Jason Gilly for kidnapping and holding Daleen against her will. They did not have enough for a murder charge. Jason was denying everything. His mom was adamant that he was innocent, and Jason's family would then say that in fact Daleen was at the house with Jason, but she left alive and well Sunday morning. Another contradiction. Although Jason was now the only suspect in her disappearance, he walked out of custody after prosecutors said there wasn't enough evidence to press charges against him for kidnap. The prosecutor said it doesn't matter how strong your gut is, you have to be able to prove something. So the police needed more. They needed to find Aileen. Once out of jail, Jason said he had basically been caught up in a bad situation, but he was not a bad person. It was wrong place, wrong time, and yes, it looked a certain way, but it didn't mean it was that way. Gilly told KCRA3 earlier this week that Carlson was at his home in those early morning hours Sunday, but left on her own. He spoke to the media and said, "It's been a rough few days. I'm trying to recuperate right now. I hope they find her okay. I wish they would find the facts first before they arrest somebody. They've been interrogating my mom, my grandma, everybody. All fingers are pointing at me, I understand. Why would I be charged with kidnapping when I'm totally not that person? I'd never hurt myself or anybody. Everybody that knows me knows that." CCTV from a 7-Eleven showed that at 11 a.m. the following morning, he had topped up the gas in his car. Whilst in the 7-Eleven, he was seen wiping his arms and shirt, and further enhancement on the footage showed he was covered in dirt. They then focused their attention on searching new areas, including parts of the Calaveras River, commonly used as a dumping ground for all kinds of things. This area was particularly muddy and overgrown, and it was just a few blocks from Jason's house. Boston police out on the Calaveras River searching for any signs of a woman who disappeared more than a week and a half ago. 23-year-old Daleen Carlson hasn't been seen or heard from since August 7th. Police aren't saying at this point what led them to the Calaveras River. The search is taking place just north of the University of Pacific campus, that location just about 2 miles from the Food for Lust grocery store where she was last seen, and just 2 blocks from the home of a man who was initially arrested in her disappearance. 25-year-old Jason Kelly, of course, remember, was arrested this week. He was arrested on Monday on charges of false imprisonment and kidnapping. Now, he was released again on Wednesday afternoon, but police say he's still a person of interest. Newly released documents show that police believe Jason Gilly has been lying to them since the first time they questioned him. The documents show that Gilly first told officers he wasn't with Daylene Carlson the night she disappeared. But former boyfriend Jacob Evangelista told police that at 5 Sunday morning, he received a text message. Daylene said she was at Jason's house drinking, but that she would be leaving soon to come to his house. This was the last time Jacob has seen or spoken with Daylene. Gilly later said he and Daylene went to his home, had sex, and then an argument ensued, but he gave her a ride. The report states that Jason got on the Crosstown Freeway and then south on Highway 99 for approximately 40 minutes until stopping at an unknown location where he claims he let Daylene out of the car. And for the first time, we are hearing Daylene's phone send a text message late Sunday morning. At about November 25th Sunday morning, Gilly's roommate received a text saying Daylene said she was somewhere on Country Club and that her phone was dying. James said he did not know if it was Daylene that was sending these messages, only that they were coming from her phone. The text message is just that. It's texts that come to you, but who's sending that? Could be sent from anybody. Anybody could have had control of that phone and been sending those messages. Search for Daylene Carlson has now lasted more than 7 weeks. Here's a look back. Daylene was last seen August 7th leaving Finnegan's Pub. Then August 15th, police arrested 25-year-old Jason Gilly, who was seen leaving with Carlson the night she disappeared. 2 days later, Gilly was released after the DA decided not to file criminal charges because of lack of evidence. And then on August 18th, search crews looking for Daylene found a flip-flop that may have belonged to her in the Calaveras River. 2 months after she went missing, a farm worker in a cornfield would find Daylene. Her body was so badly decomposed, it was virtually just her skeleton. She was naked and had been shot 5 times from behind. 1 bullet was to the back of her head, and 2 had hit her in the back. It appeared she was clutching her head as she fell, and it looked like an execution-style killing, with her having been on her knees and facing away from the gun. A black bra was located near her body, and a few days later, her jeans were discovered 6 miles away. From a missing persons case to a murder mystery, we have this new at 5 tonight. We now know the body of a woman found this weekend in a San Joaquin County cornfield has been identified as Daylene Carlson. We continue to follow this incoming information in this case out of Stockton. KCRA 3's Rich Ibra joins us now from the police department. So Rich, what's next now in this murder investigation? Well, the identification of Daylene Carlson was made through her dental records, and now investigators will have to see how she was killed and link that with any evidence that may lead to her killer. I couldn't believe that everything happened the way it did. I thought that she'd turn up somewhere. I'm glad the family can get some closure finally, but I wish it was under different circumstances. Police said that there were huge inconsistencies in Jason's statements, and despite what his grandma said, his alibi had now been picked apart. She would later admit to lying to police to protect him. They also got a call from someone else close to Jason, saying they knew he owned a gun, and sure enough, the casings found at the crime scene matched that very gun. Cell phone tower data put the pair of them together in the area she was found in, and authorities were confident that Jason had been using Daylene's phone to send messages to people after she was dead. Daylene's aunt said, "I can't conceive why someone would do it to somebody who just wanted to be a friend. She wanted people to like her. She loved people. She was a little social magnet, you know? I can't understand why. I honestly think he probably advanced himself and she probably refused it." The prosecutor added that based off of all of the evidence they had, Jason had convinced Daylene to go to his house, after stopping for some alcohol, possibly offering to drive her home after. But when they got to his house, things took a quick and dark turn. They believe he raped her, grabbed his gun, forced her back into his car, and drove her to the cornfield where he shot her to death. According to text messages, it appeared Jason had spoken to Daylene far more than had been let on. In a 3-day span, he had sent her 200 texts, the final few being on the same day she was last seen. The messages had become more demanding and sexual, including incessant requests for her underwear and photographs of her naked. Daylene would either try to laugh them off and ignore them or just dismiss him outright. He had a real fixation with her, and authorities said the only possible motive for wanting her dead would be because he sexually assaulted her and he knew she would report him. The prosecutor said he killed her because he raped her and he didn't want that information to get out. Why bring the gun to take her home? Because she were never going to take her. What was going through her head when she was being marched in that cornfield? The defendant had Daleen strip and kneel down with her hands behind her head. The prosecution's case was now as strong as it could be, and they had more than 1,000 pages of evidence, and that was without the phone records. Jason Gilley was charged with the kidnap, rape, and murder of Daleen Carlson. We're learning more information tonight about the death of a Stockton woman and the evidence against the man accused of killing her. KCRA 3's Melinda Meza was in court for the second day of hearings to look at the evidence against Jason Gilley. Well, court just wrapped up a short time ago on this day 2 of Jason Gilley's preliminary hearing. Now it's up to a judge to decide if there's enough evidence in this case to go to trial. Gilley is accused of murder, rape, and kidnapping of Daleen Carlson. Because of the special circumstances of the kidnapping and rape, it made him eligible for California's capital punishment. However, back in February 2006, the execution of condemned inmate Michael Morales was temporarily suspended because of his defense claims that California's administration of the lethal injection would subject him to an unnecessary risk of excessive pain, and thus it would violate the Eighth Amendment's prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment. Morales had been on death row since 1983 for the kidnap, rape, and murder of Terry Winchell. This had flowed into other capital punishment cases, and the DA announced they would not be seeking the death penalty, but they were pushing for life without parole given the level of premeditation. His former best friend Robert Cousins said he was disgusted and had completely written him out of his life. When things in the media were tough, Robert let him stay at his house to get away from it all. Everyone had defended him so much because of how adamant he was that he had nothing to do with it. 23-year-old innocent woman. She didn't deserve to die the way she did at all. So why'd you come down here today? To be honest, I want to watch this step by step. I want to see this man go down for what he did to that girl. I got a 5-year-old daughter at home, so I don't feel any sympathy for him or his family, anybody who lied for him, anybody that helped him out. I don't feel sorry for him. How did you know Mr. Gilley? I've known him for 20 years. He was my best friend. His stories changed so many times. I mean, I don't see how people can sit back and look like, if this guy's innocent, why is he continuing to lie? Did you have any interaction with him after Daleen went missing? Yes. Describe that. He had been staying at my house for a couple weeks, just to get away from it all. People coming by his house, bugging him. 20 years I was trying to help him out. How was his demeanor? Cool, calm, and collected, really. He wasn't worried. That's what the eerie part is. Just cool, calm, and collected. Wasn't worried? Not at all. It didn't seem like it at all. I sat him down one night and I asked him, "Did you have anything to do with it? Do you know what happened to her?" He said, "No, I don't know what happened to her." "Has the murder weapon been found?" "We have no murder weapon. We're well within our right to charge personal use of a firearm. We have ballistic evidence. We don't have we have not confirmed that we have the actual weapon itself, but there's ballistic evidence. We have a series of facts, forensic and otherwise, that would allow us to deduce one fact, and that the fact is that she was raped. We'll be put to that test at the preliminary hearing and have a judge determine whether the circumstantial evidence shows that or not. Do you think anyone else was involved?" "Not. In my heart of hearts, I think it was just him. You said you describe yourself as his best friend for all these years." "Yeah." "Are you supporting him now?" "No, I can't support something like that. I can't support it. Just seeing all the facts that are starting to come out, I can't support something like that." As soon as Jason was removed from protective custody and placed in general inmate population, he was beaten up that evening by Daleen's cousin. It was now just over 2 years since Daleen went missing and Jason would go on trial. After numerous different stories, Jason's final one was this. Jason left Finnegan's bar with Daleen. They bought alcohol at the store and he took Daleen back to his house where they slept together. He said Daleen then got angry and wanted to go home, demanding that Jason drive her. He said in the car Daleen called him a piece of garbage and tried to jump out of the moving vehicle, but Jason had locked the doors. He then dropped her off in Modesto, got back on the freeway and went home. That I can tell you it was emotional for the jury today as they heard closing arguments from the prosecution. But the defense attorney says that cell towers could feed 3 different sites and that all the evidence presented today is circumstantial. Gillies. The defense attorney says Gilly did not kidnap, rape, or kill Daleen. He says he admits to lying, but he says he lied to cover up his sexual relationship with Daleen because that would have been inappropriate to other friends. Now, the defense will continue its side of its closing arguments tomorrow morning, and then Jason Gilly's fate will be in the hands of the jury. Jason Gilly was found guilty of kidnapping and murder. The charge of rape ended in a mistrial. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jason has never admitted what really happened that night. Daleen Carlson had packed up her life to make a huge move. She had big plans and dreams and worked everything out to make sure she fulfilled them. A night out with friends became a horrifying nightmare for the 23-year-old, and one can only imagine how frightening her final moments must have been, begging for her life in a cold, dark field, with no one around to hear or help her. Her Aunt Maggie said in an interview, "It's not that you ever get over it. What helps with healing is remembering the good times, remembering everything that was good when she was alive, because what we did get was great." Like my video and share your thoughts in the comments section. Also share it with your friends and family. Keep supporting and help me reach 1K subscribers.